There are moments in history when a quiet deal changes the course of the world. One handshake, one signature, one promise. 50 years ago, such a deal was made, and it shaped everything we know about modern wealth, power, and stability. It was called the Petrodollar System. It made the US dollar the center of the global economy, and today, that system is dying. This is the story of how it began, why it lasted so long, and why its collapse will reshape the century ahead. Because when the petrodollar dies, the dollar as we know it follows. The illusion of endless demand. The year was 1973. The United States had just abandoned the gold standard. For the first time in modern history, the dollar was not backed by anything tangible, only faith. That same year, war erupted in the Middle East. Oil prices quadrupled. The US needed a new foundation for its currency, and fast. So Washington made a deal with Riyadh. Under the secret terms of an agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia, oil would be priced and sold exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, America would guarantee Saudi Arabia's security, provide advanced weapons, and support its monarchy indefinitely. It was elegant in its simplicity. The world needed oil. Oil could only be bought in dollars. Therefore, the world needed dollars. Within a decade, every major oil-producing nation had followed suit. From Kuwait to Nigeria, from Venezuela to Iran, oil was sold in dollars, and the petrodollar was born. This system created artificial constant demand for the US currency. Countries needed dollars to buy energy. Banks needed dollars to finance trade. Central banks needed dollars as reserves. The dollar became the bloodstream of global commerce, and the United States became the only nation able to print the world's energy currency at will. The empire of oil and credit. The petrodollar was more than an economic agreement. It was the silent engine of American power. With the world holding dollars, Washington could issue debt almost without limit. Foreign nations would buy U.S. Treasury bonds to recycle their oil profits, a process known as petrodollar recycling. That debt, in turn, financed the largest military buildup in history, endless foreign wars, and an ever-growing standard of living at home. The U.S. didn't just export products, it exported the dollar itself. Every barrel of oil, every international loan, every global trade deal reinforced the same message: energy equals dollars, dollars equal power. But behind that illusion of permanence, the foundation was fragile because it depended on one thing that cannot be controlled forever: trust. Cracks in the foundation. For decades, the petrodollar looked unshakable, but systems built on trust always erode slowly, then fail suddenly. The first cracks appeared after 9/11. U.S. military interventions in the Middle East destabilized the very region that sustained dollar-priced oil. Nations began to question whether American security guarantees were worth the cost. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis showed the world that the dollar's strength was not eternal. It was borrowed confidence. Even allies began diversifying their reserves, quietly shifting small percentages away from U.S. bonds. By the 2010s, something new was happening. China, now the world's largest energy importer, began paying for oil in yuan. Russia followed. Then India. Deals emerged between Gulf states, China, and even African producers, all experimenting with non-dollar oil settlements. For the first time in half a century, oil could be bought without the dollar. The spell was breaking. The death of the petrodollar. In early 2023, something historic happened, quietly, without headlines. Saudi Arabia confirmed that it was open to selling oil in currencies other than the US dollar. It was the final pillar cracking. For nearly 50 years, Saudi commitment to dollar-only oil had been the backbone of the system. Now, even that loyalty was fading. That statement, barely noticed outside economic circles, was the financial equivalent of a tectonic shift. For the first time since 1974, oil is no longer exclusively tied to the dollar. That means the world's demand for dollars, which has supported U.S. debt, U.S. markets, and U.S. dominance, is beginning to fall. The petrodollar didn't collapse in an explosion. It's dying the same way empires do, slowly, then suddenly. And when the final trust evaporates, the consequences will come fast. Why this matters more than people think to understand what's at stake, you have to see how the petrodollar shaped the modern economy. When the dollar became the world's reserve currency, it gave the U.S. an exorbitant privilege. America could print money to buy real goods from abroad. It could borrow cheaply because the rest of the world needed its debt. And it could sanction enemies by cutting them off from the dollar system entirely. That power became a weapon, and like all weapons, its overuse led to resistance. When Washington used the dollar as a tool of punishment, freezing reserves, banning transactions, sanctioning banks, nations took note. They began building parallel systems, new payment networks, regional trade blocs, and alternative reserves. Every sanction pushed another nation to ask the same question: what happens if we stop using dollars altogether? Now that question has an answer, and the answer is nothing catastrophic for them, but potentially catastrophic for us. The slow unraveling. As the petrodollar system fades, three long-term effects begin to unfold. First, global demand for U.S. debt weakens. Countries that once recycled oil profits into U.S. treasuries are now diversifying. That means fewer buyers for the debt that finances America's deficits. Second, inflation becomes structural. If fewer foreign buyers hold dollars, the value of the dollar declines. Imports become more expensive. The cost of living rises even as wages stagnate. Third, U.S. global influence contracts. The ability to project power abroad, militarily and financially, depends on control of the world's money. Without the petrodollar, that control erodes. This process will not happen overnight. But like every collapse pattern, it accelerates with each feedback loop. Fewer dollars abroad means weaker demand. Weaker demand forces more borrowing. More borrowing fuels inflation. Inflation reduces trust. Trust loss accelerates flight from the dollar. It is the same cycle, the same math that has ended every empire before. The petrodollar pattern. Look at history. When the British pound lost its global dominance after World War II, it wasn't sudden. It took about 2 decades, a slow decline punctuated by crises. The empire had spent beyond its means, and its currency followed its fortunes. Before that, the Spanish silver real, the Dutch guilder, the French franc, each held world reserve status. Each collapsed once the empire behind it overextended. The pattern is clear: economic dominance, overextension, financial privilege, loss of trust, currency decline. The petrodollar was America's version of that privilege. Its unraveling marks the transition from global dominance to managed decline. The only question now is, how fast? The math of a new order. As the petrodollar dissolves, the world doesn't collapse, it reorganizes. New trade routes, new settlement systems, new alliances. China and Russia are promoting alternative energy exchanges denominated in yuan and rubles. India is experimenting with a rupee-based oil trade. Even U.S. allies are testing digital currencies and bilateral clearing systems to reduce reliance on SWIFT and the dollar network. It's a multipolar monetary world, one without a single global reserve. That sounds stable, but history suggests otherwise. When no single currency anchors trade, financial crises multiply. Confidence becomes fragmented, liquidity dries up faster, And during stress, every nation retreats inward, protecting its own reserves, its own people. In other words, globalization ends the same way the petrodollar began, quietly, with a deal no one noticed until it was too late. The modern trigger, the exact moment the petrodollar died, will not appear in a textbook. There was no ceremony, no announcement. Just a series of small, cumulative acts. Saudi Arabia signing oil contracts in yuan, China and Brazil settling trade without dollars, Russia demanding payment in rubles for energy exports, even France, a U.S. ally, purchasing liquefied natural gas in yuan for the first time. Each deal chips away at dollar supremacy. Each one removes a link from the global dollar chain. By the time people realize what has changed, the network will already be rewired. That's how systems collapse in the modern era, not through explosions, but through quiet disconnection. The domestic consequence. So what does this mean for you, the individual, the saver, the worker? It means the dollar in your pocket is no longer just domestic money. Its value depends on global trust that is fading. When fewer nations hold dollars, the U.S. must fund itself internally. That means higher interest rates, rising debt costs, and constant inflationary pressure. Ordinary citizens will feel it not through headlines, but through daily prices. Groceries creeping upward, savings buying less each year, housing affordability slipping further out of reach. And because the system hides its fragility behind statistics, the shift will feel slow until it isn't. The lesson of the petrodollar. The petrodollar system was never about oil alone. It was about control. Control over trade, over capital, over the story of what money is worth. Its death marks the end of an era, the American century of effortless dominance. The next system, whatever form it takes, will be more contested, less stable, and less forgiving. But every end carries a beginning. The death of the petrodollar also creates space for innovation, for new systems of trust, perhaps built not on coercion but on transparency, technology, or shared interest. The world is not ending. It is changing its currency of belief. The uncomfortable truth, the petrodollar just died, not with a crash, but with a whisper. Its heartbeat is fading from global markets as nations quietly move on. The dollar still stands, but it stands on foundations that no longer exist. History teaches the same lesson again and again. When the trade routes shift, the world map changes. When the currency shifts, the world order follows. For now, the dollar still feels safe, familiar, unquestioned. So did every currency before it, right up until the end. The question isn't whether the petrodollar is gone. It's whether we understand what replaces it and how soon we'll find out.